It's about this time of year that us Gooners are taunted by Spurs fans, or we have been in years gone by, with the phrase, mind the gap. Now, we're not going to do that this year because we've got more good grace and more good sense. The other gap I'd like to talk about is the tax gap. It's not quite as exciting as the football gap, but it's quite large. It's 35 billion. The government have given us that estimate at the back end of 2013, up from 32 billion. So what is the tax gap? Well, it's the difference between the tax that the government actually collect and the tax they would collect if they applied the legislation perfectly. Now, what's it made up of? The main contributor to the tax gap, perhaps unsurprisingly, is evasion and fraud. But a big contributor, over 20% of that tax gap, is made up by tax avoidance and legal interpretation. And it's that tax gap, together with the overwhelming need to reduce public sector debt, and also the need to be just seen to be doing something when so many people are suffering benefit cuts, to be seen to be doing something to gather in tax at the top end. And that's driven a strategy that phonetically beautifully can be summed up as stars, tars and gars. Stars is naming and shaming. It works really well to name in the press the individuals and corporates that people know well who have avoided tax. Jimmy Carr was the poster boy for what you shouldn't do in relation to tax avoidance, and he seems to have been overtaken by Chris Moyles. The corporate sector has Google, Starbucks and Amazon, high profile tax avoiders in an aggressive sense. So it gets the public on your side with stories like that in the press. People get irate about it. I'm paying my tax, how comes they're able to avoid it? TARS is targeted anti-avoidance rules, and they relentlessly continue to be brought through to legislation, and that won't stop. Targeted legislation to prevent perceived and actual abuse that the government have identified. And the last part is GAR, which is the General Anti-Abuse Rule, which is kind of big fat safety net, a legislative safety net. If the targeted legislation doesn't work, if you can't catch the individuals through the courts and the tribunals, you can use the General Anti-Abuse Rule. It's been in force now since last July, but we haven't seen much activity. That, I'm sure, will change. Those three things look like being pretty effective, and we'll see that continue to operate as a kind of gastric band on the public's appetite for aggressive tax avoidance. Now, I think financial planners should see that as very good news, because those are the clients who may have challenged them before as to why they weren't recommending more aggressive, racy, risky schemes. They can resist that challenge much more powerfully. Now, in fact, the challenge probably won't even be there because of that reduction in appetite. You can stick with the tried and tested, stick with stuff that works, stick with strategies that are permitted by the legislation. Effectively, like Arsenal's newfound defensive solid game plan, boring is the new exciting, and financial planners should really embrace that.